y'all. Welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texas parents about what's going on in our schools. Today, I am joined by John Papola, the founder and CEO of Emergent Order, a studio in Austin, Texas, as well as how you probably know him, the founder and spokesman of Dad Saves America. John, thanks for joining us today.
Mandy, thanks for having me on the show.
I am a huge fan, as just a mom. I'm a huge fan of a dad working to save America. I'm right there with you. I think that the parent empowerment movement is truly about saving the next generation of Texans. And what you're doing on your show, you have hundreds of thousands of followers who are watching you as you're really trying to peel back a lot of the layers of Marxism, wokeism, what is kind of the long march through the institutions that have infiltrated, particularly our K through 12 system. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about what was the impetus for you starting Dad Saves America?
Well, I think it starts with being a dad. I mean, it's, when my son was born, it was a very transformational experience for me. I was working in New York City. I'd met my wife actually at work at Nickelodeon. So I was always, working with kids in one way or another. And no, I didn't see any of the stuff from the Netflix documentary. I had some almost angelic time at Nickelodeon. But I'm an ambitious guy, and I was working in a very ambition-driven industry, entertainment in New York City.
Yep.
And my son is born, and it is like my whole world gets turned upside down in the best possible way. It's like, it was not the thing that everyone tells you in a certain sense, because yes, you suddenly are responsible for another human being, and that is, you could say that's a weight on your shoulder, it's a motivation to work harder. I was already motivated. What it did for me was utterly kill my ego. It put my own goals second fiddle to him. And it turns out when your own goals are second to something greater and more important, you can actually pursue them with a lot more freedom. It's a kind of freedom. And so I experienced that, and it was part of why I felt the courage, frankly, to pick up my family and move to Texas and start Emergent Order back in 2011. And then, a lot of our work has been educational, and I've always been interested in education. And I am like walking school choice with the choices we've made for our son. I mean, we've sampled a lot of the schools here in Austin, more than most families do. And the thing I noticed, though, that motivated Dad Saves America was that his generation, his peers, are suffering. And they're suffering in ways that I didn't understand really as a Gen Xer. The anxiety, the failure to launch, the fear of each other and of relationships, all the things that people talk about, people like Jonathan Haidt talk about in him and Greg Lukianoff's book, The Coddling of the American Mind. I was seeing that with a lot of my son's friends. He has actually generally done pretty well. Like, he doesn't suffer from anxiety or some of those things. And my heart breaks for the parents who are grappling with that. And it's a lot of parents.
Yes.
But as someone who cares about sort of big picture ideas and about freedom and liberty and America and America's founding principles, it pointed to something that was very disturbing. How can you preserve a free society if you have a generation that doesn't want freedom, that is afraid of risk, that doesn't get their driver's licenses because they're afraid, that doesn't ask girls out on dates because they're afraid? Fear and freedom are really they do battle with each other.
Yeah.
And the rise of fear-based parenting, of fear-based childhood, I think poses an existential threat to the country. And so that led me to say, I think my libertarian inclinations are downstream of this.
Yeah.
And I think I have to come forward and explore this through this lens of fatherhood, because I think this is where a lot of this starts. This is sort of the headwaters of a lot of our problems, if you will. And, people that are aware of this know that 1 in 4 to 3 Americans are being raised in a home without a biological step or adoptive father. I can't reach the father that isn't there because they're not there. But
Right.
I can, I think, try to make being a father heroic and something you should want to do,
And it is.
and something that you should see as a mission.
Yeah.
And so that's what this is about. That's why I think dad can save America, or at least help.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct in everything that you said. We are seeing this rise in anxiety and depression. Kids that I'm blown away by my friends whose kids are in the teenage years, and almost all of them have said their kid does not care about getting a license. They are not taking girls out on dates. It is one of those things that you see. They're not making decisions, and they're not allowed to fail, quite frankly, or make oftentimes bad decisions that you learn from. And that is really, really concerning, and that fear-based, because I would say being brave and courageous is really what made our country, right? From the pilgrims that sailed over in 1620, they were very brave to come and start with nothing. From the founders who fought the revolution, they had to be brave. And I think that is a virtue that we are not instilling in far too many of our children, particularly our young males who don't know how amazing it is. But you talked about something that I talk about all the time, that I call it's the lightning strike of love. That moment you first hold your child and your whole world changes.
Yeah.
And that really does transcend race and socioeconomics and zip code and state you live in. We all feel that. And the fathers who are there, they feel it too.
There's a concept that I think heard from Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis, and the book is great. And it talks about the dad brain. And there's been some studies around this. And again, like some of these social science studies deserve scare quotes around them.
Yes.
They're like, are they replicatable? Is this a bunch of nonsense?
Right.
But what they point to is, number one, that we as men actually go through a pretty deep transformation when we become fathers. There are things that have our testosterone actually goes down a little bit. We become more nurturing. We reorient and restructure our minds.
Yeah.
And so I think it doesn't mean we become women, and it doesn't mean that we cease to be men, but we become a new kind of man when we become a father. And I think that is part of this adventure of life, right? Like life is like this crazy set of adventures. And I'm now my son is 19 going closer to 20. And now I'm starting to say like, oh my gosh, like we're getting into the grandfather zone. That's a whole new adventure.
Right?
I know I got the white beard, but I'm not that old. So
you get all the love and the fun, I hear, without all the craziness that comes with raising young children.
yes, it's like you get to embrace all of these different phases of life.
Yeah.
And you need to be ready for that. And I do think there's something that's happened. I think it's very deep, which is that, and I know this will sound like gobbledygook or like some kind of elite talk, because there's a lot of people who are not feeling wealthy at all. But historically, as a human, we are in a wealthy society.
Yes.
And, wealthy societies struggle with obesity among the poor, not poor societies. You go to a poor country, the poor are starving.
Right.
In our country, we have horrible food, and the cheapest food is often bad. And there's a lot of reasons for why our poor and working poor tend to be overweight. But it's a kind of like blur your eyes and look at the scope of history snapshot.
Yeah.
That we're in a different kind of like anthropological situation.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the things we're dealing with when it comes to our kids and grappling with developing courage, having bravery, being risk takers, we have wealth disease where we have comfort. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't have that need that comes from like being part of a circumstance like the frontiers or like the 13-year-old immigrants that show up on the boat and get thrown into a coal mine. That's a different set of circumstances that you face. And I don't want us to go back to being thrown in coal mines necessarily, although there's nothing wrong with coal. But I do think we have to find a way to like rescue the baby from the bathwater.
Struggle can be helpful in some forms, obviously.
Yeah.
That's really, and it gives you something to grow from.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Catholic, I'm a Christian, and I think that I've always been attracted to the crucifix,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of a grotesque image when you look at it. I mean, it's a man hanging in this horrendous murder, this horrible execution, bleeding. It's weird when you take a step back, like it's weird. You go into this beautiful room and there's like a mostly naked man hanging bleeding on a cross.
Yeah.
But the lesson of that suffering, the lesson that even God's son suffered and died on a cross,
Right.
like that should be empowering, actually. I think if it's properly understood, I think that's what it was for. It was to show us the love, the sacrificial love of
Right.
God. And I think whether you're Christian or not, I think that the moral lesson of that for like what it means to be a person is really profound.
Yeah, I think you're right. When we're talking about those sacrifices and looking back historically at the sacrifices that parents made. I brought up, the pilgrims who are crossing the ocean on a questionable boat and all the things that are the sacrifices of just history before on the frontier to settle America, to fight in the wars, whatever it is. But we have struggles that are probably based on abundance and wealth in a different way right now that we're facing for kids. And you specifically talk about in one of your recent podcasts, you say our kids are being taught to destroy civilization. We've coddled and encouraged a generation of barbarians through both intentional activism, confusion, and neglect. I could not agree more. We are seeing it all across this great state and America, particularly in our public school classrooms. We've got parents that are rising up and from all sides of the political spectrum and every other spectrum, race, income, everything, that are saying, what's going on in our schools? Something that we're seeing is these leftist organizations that have infiltrated the institutions, or they're forming these groups, associations, many of which are funded by our tax dollars. So here in Texas, we've got AFT, American Federation for Teachers, that's run by Randy Weingarten from New York.
The worst thing in the world.
The worst thing in the world. Yeah, it was Mike Pompeo that said that Randy Weingarten was the most dangerous person in America because she has captive millions of kids. We've got Texas Freedom Network, which was founded by Cecil Richards, who was former parent of Planned Parenthood, who's created all these offshoot groups to teach the truth, right? When we talk about truth, we've got Pastors for Texas Children working along with them, AFL-CIO, far leftist Marxist organizations that are steering the pedagogy, what's going on in our classrooms and who's there and how we're seeing them. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing, what you believe are some of those challenges facing the students who are being exposed to and oftentimes indoctrinated with this radical way of thinking that, historically has never panned out? We can look, Marxism, communism, whatever, has killed 100 million people in the 20th century. So what do you see going on? And then how do parents fight back?
Well, I think it gets so much harder than even just looking at the public schools, because some of the private schools can be even worse.
Fair. That's fair.
Because they are the most ideal. They're mostly, let me put this the best way I can. Some of this is a kind of idealism, right? It is a desire to want to tackle the problems of our society. That fervor of activism is to say, look at all these problems. We need to criticize them. We need to be critical. The whole critical theory thing fundamentally is what it says it is. It is criticizing what exists, and then that's kind of it. It doesn't create.
Right.
It doesn't create. In fact, so I believe I might get this wrong. Let me see if I can remember this quote. There's a Faust quote that was Karl Marx's favorite. I think it is, all that exists deserves to perish. I might be off by a word or two. That is the beating heart of critical social justice
Mm-hmm.
and critical pedagogy.
Yeah.
It is look at everything, look at the family, look at the structure of all the institutions that have survived. Of course, church, all of the Marxist regimes throughout the 20th century went after faith immediately. They went after the things that created structure and provided a backstop
Yep.
for when you fall, that there's people to catch you so that you don't fall into the abyss of hell.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the church, that's the family, the philosophy, your belief in the goodness of your people.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is under constant assault, and we are told it's in the name of building a better world. But when you ask, what does this better world look like exactly, you won't get an answer.
Right.
You don't get an answer from Karl Marx. You don't really get an answer from any of the various offshoots and philosophies that spring from him. All these critical conscious people, these critical social justice, intersectionality, critical race theory, gender ideology, they all are inspired by Marx. They have postmodern, weird add-ons on top of Marx. They sort of take the bourgeois versus the proletariat and transplant it onto like the men versus women and, blacks versus whites. Yeah. But it's the same stuff.
It's the same stuff. Well, you're right, 100%. So it was an Italian Marxist who Marx drew from Gramsci, who said the only way you destroy Western civilization, which was founded on family and the church, right? And this goal to grow and do better and serve your family first and your community next and God, obviously. But he said the only way to destroy Western civilization is to destroy the church and the family. And that is where, when you start talking about how kind of this shift to the radical left that results in absolute death and destruction everywhere it's gone, because it didn't work. The proletariat didn't rise up with the rise of Western civilization, the Industrial Revolution, all of these developments that have made our lives significantly better. The proletariat, the working class, said, oh, life is nice. Got electricity. I can love my kids. I love them way more than anybody else. This is great. And so that's when they started developing that intersect that you're talking about, where they went and said,
that's right,
let's go create conflict and say it's black versus white. It's rich versus poor. When we say based historically, we're not that poor, right? And so it just is this complete destruction. There's no actual solutions.
It's just
burn it all down.
It starts with, it's all propaganda and rhetoric, right? So let's take the 3-letter ideology, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first thing is, again, as a marketer, as somebody that spent a decade in New York City working in advertising and marketing, who doesn't like diversity?
Right.
Who doesn't want to be included?
Right.
Who doesn't want things to be fair and equitable? These are, it's the name the thing, good, happy words.
Right.
Pay no attention to what they actually do, or what it actually means, because they almost always, in these cases, mean the exact opposite.
Right.
So diversity and inclusion end up being fundamentally exclusionary.
Mm-hmm.
Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist. Right. He's this sort of, I'm just going to be insulting here. I'm sorry, but he's kind of a mid-wit academic. He's not the brightest bulb in the bunch.
Right.
He just isn't.
Yeah.
You just watch this man conduct himself. I don't wish him ill will as a brother in God, but he's not the sharpest tool in the toolbox. And yet he was elevated in the aftermath of the Floyd.
Right. The BLM movement.
The Floyd riots and the death of George Floyd and all of that. He became the idea man du jour.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the NBA inviting him in to browbeat the players. Mm-hmm. His basic formula is, and this is, again, almost a direct quote from that book, the way to solve past discrimination is with current discrimination. And the way to solve current discrimination is with future discrimination. So what is he talking about? What he's saying is, look, when you look at our society and you see inequity, in his case, he just means anything less than perfect racial identity apportionment. Like if you go to your doctor's office and there's 10 doctors and one of them isn't black, that doctor's office is racist.
Right.
That's his definition. I need to see perfect racial proportionality everywhere I look in society. That doesn't really make any sense because, first of all, race is weird. It's kind of a construct, but to the extent it's a thing, it's emergent out of regions. People's cultures come from their regions. They have both genetic and cultural proclivities. People are inclined to want to do certain things more than other things because their parents and grandparents did it and they have pride, or because they literally in some cases are genetically more wired to do them. And so that's going to happen. And we're not going to have skin deep proportionality in our institutions. Not if they're fair, not if they're based on merit.
Right.
And so his formula is merit is bad because it gives rise to unequal outcomes, unequal by this weird definition, this weird racial sort of very kind of rhymes with Nazism kind of race obsession. And we need to actively discriminate against people to reconstruct what he's putting forward as the proper order. Okay, so it turns out when people are free and they choose the things they want to choose and they are good at the things they happen to be good at, it doesn't look like the perfect world I have in my head. I have to now come in and enforce it. And that is what has happened. That is the ideology. That is this utopian ideology, but it's the weirdest utopian ideology ever. Because you talked about, like I called this stuff barbarism. And it is.
It is.
It's tribalism. It is, you are coming over the hill and you're wearing different face paint and you're probably going to steal my stuff and rape and pillage. So I hate you because of what I can see from across the room, from out in the field. That is like one step above being an animal level of thought.
Yeah.
To just treat people on the basis of their tribal identity. That is what that is. That is barbaric. And the West, the Judeo-Christian, however you want to construct your vision of what the West is, go back to Plato, Jerusalem and Greece and the Roman Empire, Christendom. What does Christ do? Christ comes and says, we are all equal in the eyes of God. Hey, you know what? I'm gonna have tax collectors and prostitutes and all kinds of crazy people in my coalition because I love them all. They all have equal dignity. That is such a radical and almost not human kind of radical ideal because we are groupish. But that's the ideal. That's the ideal of the West. And the worst example of this toxic ideology that permeates the departments of education that have been teaching teachers for generations. This stuff is very deeply rooted. All the departments, the schools of education,
where higher ed,
higher ed schools. I want to be a teacher. I love kids. I want to be a teacher. You go to Johns Hopkins or you go to University of Pennsylvania, and you're being trained by psychopathic Marxists that believe this crazy stuff. And it's all around you. It is the water you're swimming in. You don't even know you're wet.
Right. That's part of it. So going back, because we have to see where kind of this barbarism comes from. We were talking about Karl Marx and I mentioned Gramsci. But if people don't understand, I use the term the long march through the institutions that was coined by a radical Marxist named Rudi Dutschke. He was a college student who partnered with Herbert Marcuse, who came out of the Frankfurt School in Germany. They all were listening to Marx and Gramsci and the whole cabal of let's just take the power. And some people might die in the course of it, but that's okay.
You've got to break a few eggs to make your omelet.
That's right. That's right. And so they literally realized, oh my goodness, the working class has a really good life. And the fathers are with their families and these people are not going to come out and riot because, yes, we can advocate for improvements, but they're not trying to overthrow everything. So we are going to have to take over the institutions, specifically the thought institutions. Yes. And we witnessed this in the past year where these institutions that I know growing up, looking at Harvard, Yale, MIT, it was like wow, you get to, that is really impressive. That is it. And that's how it's been made. They infiltrated them, and you don't even realize it's happening. And then they went into the Fortune 500 companies. Ibram X. Kendi, he's been doing all this coaching and doing all this radical training. And if you don't put a black square in your social media, you're a racist. And if you don't do this, you're bad. And according to Mao, if you don't have a correct political orientation, you don't have a soul. It's this mentality of, if you're not one of us, you're not worthy of living, right?
Ultimately, that's where this has always gone.
And here's how you become one of us. You either get with us, or you can go have your brainwashed, again, as Mao did, said to people in China when he took over and slaughtered 50 million of them or starved them to death. But there were literally kids on college campuses that were marching through the streets saying Mao, Marx, and Marcuse.
Yes.
And this is how this has all gone on for 50, 60 years, and how it's infiltrated. And now we have kids all across Texas. I get reports of this all the time. These privilege walks. Do you know what a privilege walk is?
I don't. I'm bracing for the description of this. I don't know what this is.
So we have
sounds very Mao. It sounds like a struggle session.
Oh, it is, because you got to break them down, right? You got to make them understand the disparities and that we're not equal. And they are lining kids up on the baselines of the football fields or the basketball courts and going through these far leftist teachings and saying, okay, kids, let's just understand diversity, equity, inclusion, and privilege. Some are privileged, some are not, right? And this is why we need DEI. If you have two parents at home, take a step forward. If your parents have one college degree, take a step forward. If there's two college degrees, take a step forward. If you live in a house and not an apartment, take 2 steps forward. And they literally walk these kids out and then say, turn around and look around. Up here, you're the privileged. And they ask about their skin color too, by the way.
Right,
like,
of course.
If you're white, take 2 steps forward.
I heard that.
It is radical.
So I get so angry.
I know,
I'm sorry.
me too.
My Italian genetics come out, and I
parents are
I want to throw a
angry.
plate of pasta across the room. Okay, so let's start with let's take them at their word for a minute. Right? What is it that they say they want to do? They say they want to create a world in which people feel included, in which there's a kind of equality and harmony.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
They don't say, I want to create Stalinism, but
that's what it leads to.
But neither did Stalin.
Right.
So, like, nobody really is twirling their mustache, even though a lot of these people turn out to have mustaches. People think they're doing good. Hitler thought he was producing the force that would make the world better and make it perfect. That's what he thought. They all think this. Everyone thinks this. Except maybe people who live literally in the underworld. But even they just see the world as kind of this fallen wreck and get while the getting's good. That's the mobster mentality. It's all,
It's chaos
It's
anyway,
it's all corrupt.
Yeah.
So I'm no more corrupt than anything else. I'm Robin Hood or something.
Yeah.
Well, there was a recent study that I covered that actually the New York Times and I think Bloomberg actively decided not to cover. They were doing a story about it and they suppressed it.
Okay.
But the study's out there. It looked at these DEI programs and this language, and it basically presented 2 groups of people, or multiple groups, but one of them was a control group, and the others saw the DEI style language. This struggle session.
Yes.
Focus on your differences. Look at who's privileged and who's oppressed stuff.
Yeah.
They drew from the language of Robin DiAngelo of White Fragility.
Yes.
And Ibram X. Kendi, both of whom pull $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 speaking fees. They're grifters.
Right.
They're it's all a scam.
Yeah. They've got their stump speech to convince you you're privileged.
You're privileged. This is like people with multiple mansions all around the world getting in front of us.
Like Bernie Sanders.
Or Michelle Obama. Yeah. It's like talking about wealth and talking about how her mom told her not to, not to trust wealth. It's like you literally are building a mansion in Hawaii and getting like the rules rigged to be able to build the mansion where the law is saying you're not allowed to build it because of the waterway or
Right.
something like
With your $100 million
it's
bank
so
account.
it's so transparently corrupt and
Yeah.
hypocritical.
Yeah.
But this study said, okay, how do people respond to this material? And what it found was the people who were presented these ideas, it had several things in subsequent surveying take place. They had elevated levels of distrust and of anger towards other groups. They wanted to, they saw disparity where there isn't. So one of the tests they did was actually present a completely neutral story. And the story was something to the effect of, I won't remember it exactly, but a student has applied to a university and meets with the admissions officer. That student ends up not being invited to come to the school. Doesn't make the cut.
Okay.
There is no reference to the student's grades, the student's race, the admissions officer's grade, race, or ideology. It is like it is a close to neutral fact-based description of this happened, then this happens. There isn't even like a cause put in. Like maybe maybe the kid didn't get in and it had nothing to do with the meeting with the admissions counselor. That's the people that were presented with all this Kendi, DEI, cultural Marxist language had like 35% more likely to think that there was racial injustice and microaggressions in this interaction as it's described, or that it was all the things we hear. So what does that say? And this is like common sense, and everybody knows this. When you focus on our differences, when you tell people, look around, look at how privileged you are, look at how underprivileged you are, look at how much further ahead your classmate is than you. It turns out you make people more sensitive to that. And they see it even when it doesn't exist. And you strip them of their agency and you turn them into little fascists. So this was the other piece of the puzzle, is that what this language led people to do is use dehumanizing language for the people that they saw as oppressors.
Yes.
Like viruses, parasites, rats. This is the language of Hitler.
Yep. And Mao.
And all of them.
Yes, all of them.
Because Hitler, by the way, ran the National Socialist Party. Nazism is a collectivist left-wing ideology. It's the right-left thing barely even makes any sense in the United States as it is. It's like a leftover from France, and which side of the house you were on. Were you for the aristocracy or for the revolution? Like that has nothing to do with America. So left-right is kind of broken, but it's really broken when we talk about history and the wars of the 20th century. Hitler was a collectivist. Yes. Hitler saw people on the basis of their group identity, whether you're proletariat or bourgeois or Aryan or not. That's all the same philosophy. That's all tribal, barbaric garbage.
Yeah.
One other example. So I mean, the thing is, these are replicatable studies. When you tell people to focus on this stuff, you radicalize them to see oppression where there isn't, and you disempower them. You make them believe that they have no internal locus of control, that they are a victim of circumstance. And like having an internal locus of control, believing that your choices actually matter and determine your fate, is one of the few things in psychology that has been consistently found to hold for producing happiness. Yeah. If I believe my choices matter, I'm happier. And I take action for obvious reasons, because I take action when I think my action will matter. I don't take action. I just put my fist in the air and go in the street and say I'm in solidarity with destruction.
Right.
If I don't think I can make a difference, I'll just be a cog in someone else's machine. I'll embrace being a victim. And there's one other example I like to point to, because this is maybe one of the most replicated sort of experiments we have. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Martin Luther King, A teacher in Michigan decided, who was had a class of all white students, but you're in Michigan in the Detroit area, and so there's a lot of racial strife in the town. Decides, I want to help my kids who are all white and all relatively like well off, middle class, whatever, to understand what Black Americans are going through right now. And so she did this experiment called the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, where she divided the class on the basis of eye color, which is arbitrary.
This happened in Texas, by the way, recently, but go ahead.
Well, this replicates everywhere you try it. And in fact, like one of my good friends, Laura Sandifer, together and Jeff created Acton Academy.
Right.
She writes about this in her book, Courage to Grow, because it's something they have actually replicated at Acton. But here's what happens. So day one, okay, brown eyes students, and the teacher basically told a story about how brown eyes people are actually better.
Yeah.
They're literally better.
Yeah.
They come from a genetic line that's better. They're smarter. They're more conscientious, all the things. And that's why brown eyes students, you're going to get cookies first. You're going to sit in the front of the class. And you're the privileged set.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day they flip it and say, actually, I'm sorry, I was mistaken. It's actually the blue eyes, green eyes. In every instance of this, it breeds massive strife. It turns the kids against each other on the basis of an entirely arbitrary characteristic that has nothing to do with their character or their capabilities. Nothing. It has nothing to do with it. It's random.
Right.
It's intentionally random. We know this. We've known this forever. We know it in our own lives.
Yeah.
And yet we submit our kids to whack job ideologues who take common sense and pervert it to divide and conquer our society from within. And we clutch our rings of our alma mater and we continue giving to the University of Texas, even though it's one of the most woke schools in the country, because we can't help it, because we don't want to believe it, because it's not that bad. No, it's bad. It's going to be bad until you stop pretending it's not bad.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head on talking about how they will demonize. And that is part of that Marxist, you're either with us or you're against us, and you can have a choice to join us. And if not, then we hate you and you should die. And I hear this all the time because a lot of times people find it fascinating. I send my kids to public school. It's a public classical charter school, so we don't have, a lot of the pop culture. There's no pop culture. There's no technology. It's classical model education, and I absolutely love it. And I think all kids can benefit, or the majority of them can benefit from having a basis in a classical education. But like, I'm a public school parent, and it's one of those moments where you can see people be like, but what kind of the opposition, the people that I kind of named that stand against the parent empowerment movement, and that's passing education freedom with education savings accounts.
Yes.
That is making sure there's transparency into what children are learning and why. It's making sure there's really high quality curriculum in classrooms. It's all of that in the parent empowerment movement. But it is always, it is a whole radical group of radical Marxists. And quite frankly, the profiteer class, you said this, that have justified steering millions and billions of dollars out of classrooms that could go to educate kids. And they've created this perverse group. And if you're against them, you are evil, you are bad, you hate public schools. And I'm like, hold on a second. I'm over here saying I love them. I send my kids to them if they're good. And that is a tactic that is used in all of these radical far leftist take it over or burn it down movements. If you don't believe everything we say, never mind you that we're stealing billions of dollars. We're grifting off of kids.
Right.
And that is really key. I hear it all the time. I'm like, hold on a second. Can't we do both? Can't we love kids, particularly the over 5 million in public schools, and want them to have a great education, and trust parents who have that deep love for their children and have the most, invested and the most desire to see them be successful? But it is a weird mental game that is played. It's
a secular religion.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things, so there's a bunch of pieces of the puzzle here when you think about public school. So for starters, the teachers' unions. And this will be a little bit of an appeal to authority, but it's a useful one. So FDR and LaGuardia, the mayor at the time of New York City, they were both opposed to public sector unions because public sector unions, by definition, are corrupt. They shouldn't be allowed to exist. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a private sector union, like the United Auto Workers Union of America in Detroit, they're representing the workers at, say, a Ford factory. And they are sitting across the table from management at Ford, who represents the company, its bottom line, its shareholders, etc.
Sure.
And so there is a certain amount of antagonism there. I think it's overblown in the sense that I think great companies understand that their people are their most important asset.
Right.
And most, I think, actually do. But
Right.
at any given time, you can be working for a guy that stinks and is a jerk. What the United Auto Workers don't do and can't force is to install their representative on the other side of the table. Number one, they can't elect, they can't fund the election of the CEO of Ford. But so that's one thing that happens with teachers unions.
Yes.
And I originally, I was living in New Jersey, which is, I remember John Corzine at the time, the governor of New Jersey, during a re-election campaign, went to a teachers union rally and said, "I'm with you." It's like, okay, wait a second. So I pay as a taxpayer,
Right.
I pay all of your salaries. You're supposed to be working for me.
That's it. That's it.
So the forgotten man that's not at the table in the public sector is the taxpayer.
That's right.
The citizen.
Yeah.
So Randy Weingarten, and if you look at the stats, it's like literally every nickel they take from, often forcibly, often in advance of receiving your paycheck as a teacher. You might be a Republican in Lubbock. Well, I'm not really sure exactly in Texas how much the unions play a role. But
the unions and associations pay a huge role because they hire those taxpayer-funded lobbyists.
Yeah, so they're sort of
hand out the checks.
Yeah, so the teachers unions in Texas maybe are doing a little more of a weird outside, try to destroy the state thing.
Well, it's just keep funding the lobbyists because we're so huge. So you've got localities that are like, we need somebody. And so they hire the same, it's TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, but then there's TASA, then there's the Guadalupe County Education Coalition and the Bexar County Coalition, and then there's this lobbyist and that lobbyist. And they funnel all this money, and it's the same 30 people that are up there texting the legislators. It's a boondoggle, but go ahead.
But
this is what's happening.
I'll
it's
spend
taxpayer money.
So like in New Jersey, I think New Jersey is super instructive when it comes to all these things. And I think Texas should do everything it can to be the opposite of New Jersey. So in New Jersey, there's a series of court cases called the Abbott cases that interpreted, this is super judicial activism. They interpreted the state constitutional right to an education to mean that essentially over time, the poorest districts spend the most. So Newark, New Jersey, where Cory Booker was the mayor and is now a senator, and was a school choice advocate while he was mayor.
I remember. I know.
And so was the rest of a largely African American city council.
African Americans support school choice
because they know you're going into a school that's spending $35,000 per head per student per year, and that's not even including all the capital expenditures. That's the other thing that is always a lie. They say what's the spending per student per year, but they leave out the $100 million bond to build the new building.
Oh yes,
that's left out of the cost per student.
Just
per
so
year.
you know, here in Texas, we have over $185 billion in ISD bonds.
Right.
That's just ISD bonds. So we're spending.
Yeah.
In 2022 and 2023, $16,792 per kid. So right at $17,000 per kid.
Yes.
That's taxpayer dollars.
Right.
But they want to say, wait, we only get $6,000. It's like, no.
No.
That's a lie.
Well, so all that money, all that spending.
Yeah.
New Jersey points to the perfect example to say, okay, when the teachers unions say the reason why test scores are down and across every metric you can measure, the school system is a failure. And even though adjusted for inflation, we're spending 300 times what we used to spend. and getting worse outcomes. We need to spend more because somehow when you magically spend more, it'll be better, even though we've been spending more forever.
Right.
New Jersey, if you go to Newark, New Jersey, you go to Camden, New Jersey. New Jersey is both one of the richest states in the country and has some of the poorest cities in the country. They're spending so much money and the outcomes are so bad and the schools are basically a prison. And the question is, where is all that money going? Because the teachers aren't getting $300,000 a year salaries. And if you add up $30,000 per student per year and you price a classroom of 30 kids, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, you're looking
like
close to
$900 grand.
Yeah.
So you're spending $900 grand per classroom of kids.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that money going?
Those profiteers.
It's going to this gigantic bloated bunch of not teachers and lobbyists and teachers unions and retire at 45 pensions that lie to their members about growing at 8% a year when they don't. And so the pension funds are all upside down and underwater and not going to pay out what they're promising. It's none of it has to do with helping a kid that comes into that classroom be better off at the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year. None of it. Zero. And I have talked to so many teachers, and I see so many of them in the comments of our videos, public school teachers who were idealistic people who came into the system wanting to work with kids, help kids. They love kids. They love learning. And they exit the system because they're like, I can't even do the job.
Yeah.
The things I am asked to do by this lumbering bureaucracy where there's 5 administrative, bureaucratic blob people that what do you do? What is your job? No one knows, but you're making more than me, so that's weird. They're just put in this narrow path in order to basically keep the school funded. So they teach to the test, which isn't necessarily going to be the worst thing in the world in theory if the test is helping.
If the curriculum is selected,
decent,
right? That's a whole other problem.
But teach to the test. Why that actually is a problem is because it isn't teach to develop mastery. It's hack to the test.
Yeah.
And then socially promote the kids.
Right.
So this is where you see like in Chicago and all these places where like none of the kids are at reading at grade level for zero. The public sector unions all need to be destroyed and banned.
Yeah.
Because they take the third party money, the taxpayer money, they extract it out of the paychecks of teachers. They then dump it entirely into the Democrats. This is a fact.
Yes.
Look up the numbers.
Yeah.
To elect people who will then keep the theft scheme going. That's what they do. They are the mob. They act like the mob. They are adjacent to the actual mob, the actual mafia. You know, you go and you look at the way these people behave. They're thugs.
Yeah.
There is no level of disdain unworthy to them as a parent, as an American, as a taxpayer, as somebody who cares about kids and wants to see them thrive. These people are the enemy of progress in this society. I don't know how much more strongly I can put it.
I'm preach. Just that's it. And we hear this all the time. Oh, there's no unions in Texas. Oh, there are.
Well, think about the fact that they're like trying to mess with Texas from the outside. They are pouring money in from outside the state.
Yes.
Because they want to flip the state's politics. That's all they're trying to do.
Right. That's right.
It's like,
I mean, that's it. So I saw there was a flyer sent in. I think it was the Corsicana area, but they did it everywhere. I just had someone from the Corsicana area send it to me, and it was literally an AFT. And I thought they're playing on the fact that a lot of people don't recognize who AFT is. American Federation for Teachers, run by Randy. But Texas is the stronghold, right? If they can get to Texas, as goes Texas, so goes America. I mean, that's the truth. And so they used very conservative language. I mean, these are radicals, as you said. They use conservative language to say education savings accounts are a liberal plot to ruin your local public schools. And it was not. And I was looking at it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that. Wow. But it is here. But they're also, you go look, I mean, they're partnering. They do events. They're partnering with all these local, what you would see as nonprofit groups. The Texas for Pastors Children, they also do the advocacy. They partner with Friends of Texas Public Schools. We see their billboards everywhere as Milder's out, saying, teachers, go vote for yourselves. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Like, it is here. It is happening here.
It's, we hear a lot from these people about voter rights and voter suppression. One thing they never note is that the school board elections are never on the same election day.
Never.
As the rest of the elections. So some of us work for a living and have to take a day off to go and vote. And we get the day off for election day in November, but the random day in May when the school board elections take place.
And bonds. And, oh
yeah, anything school, let's put it somewhere where only our people on our email list will show up.
That's right.
Because the rest of working America and working Texans are like, I don't even know what this is. I don't know when that is. They don't think election in May or March or whenever they do it. It is just, there is no aspect of this movement that isn't hypocritical, cowardly, and corrupt. And they don't even pretend to be otherwise. And I think the thing that maybe is the most heartening is that we saw their face, their mask. They've never had a great mask. It's like if you're gonna put a mask on, but it looks demonic. It's not a great mask to hide your rotten soul.
Right.
But even their marginally less evil looking mask, pretending to care about children. You watch Randy Weingarten. She gives these speeches. It's the cheesiest, most grotesque, cloying. Oh, the parents, the blah blah. It's like they were the force keeping our kids out of school.
That's right.
During COVID, we should never forget that. Catholic schools, they were sitting in school in September 2020. They saw what was happening. They took reasonable measures. And by the time fall of 2020 rolled around, before there were vaccines, whatever you feel about the vaccines, before that was even available, we knew for a fact that the virus was no more a risk to our kids than the flu. It was actually less of a risk than the flu to our kids.
Yeah.
And Sweden didn't do this. Sweden's one of the only countries that seem to have any guts. I don't know why. I don't know what's in the water up there, but they went the rational way. They went the Great Barrington Declaration way. And the teachers' unions, they'd still have us locked out of schools right now if they could.
They would. And they said it was what? They threw it all at. It's racist, it's classist, it's misogynistic, it's all those.
All the things.
All the things.
If
to put children back in the classroom.
And it's like, I swear, this entire social justice movement is like a scam put on by actual white supremacists. It's like
it's white liberals. It's all white.
Well, you just imagine. It's like I picture that at the end of all of this, it's like a Scooby-Doo episode where you take off the villain's mask and it's David Duke. Because what is it that they do? They devalue racist, white supremacist. They devalue all these really extreme terms, which allow the very small number of actual hardcore racists and white supremacists, of which there's not that many.
Right.
But it allows them to hide in plain sight. So it's a great scam if you want to make it easy to just be a white supremacist.
Right.
And then they push an ideology that creates, as I was saying earlier, racial division and strife and the rise of proto-Nazi hatred.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're David Duke and you want to subvert the society and turn everyone into racists, well, they're doing exactly that. So that, to me, is what they are.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, and this is hard for people to hear, and there's a lot of romance, and I liked my school, and I loved going to the football games, and I went to school in Pennsylvania, which is very much like Texas. Like, my football team went to the state championship. It was very similar.
Yeah.
It was a Catholic school, so it wasn't the public school, but I understand like the adults having attachment to the school. And I understand in a lot of communities in Texas and around the country, the school's the biggest employer in the town.
That's right.
So you have to look that in the eye as an adult and say, am I basing my concerns for my kids, or am I basing it for myself and for the adults?
Yeah.
Like that is our job as parents.
Yes.
Is to put our kids' interests first and not to stifle their access to the school mode, the school style that's going to help them thrive and work well for them. Because my sister-in-law is a teacher at the local school, or I'm on the PTA, or man, I love going to the football games. Like this is our community, this is our culture, this is who we are. I understand how tight-knit that can be, but just understand the forces trying to exploit that and capture it and turn it into a force of evil are great.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. They're exploiting your heart to attack your kids and turn them against you. To turn them, look at what they're doing in California. They're saying that you're not even allowed to tell the parents when a kid comes to school and starts socially transitioning.
Yeah.
So there's been work on this because, and again, so much of this is common sense. When you start as a kid to do something with your peers, to socially transition, it is really hard to change course on that. It's really hard. I've talked to young, teenagers who've experienced this themselves and who are just gay. They're just gay. They're gay kids, and they went through this up and down. And I asked. I said, I remember it was really hard. Like if you changed your hair,
right,
or you came to school during like a dress down day, because we had uniforms in Catholic school, and you were trying on like a different style.
Yeah.
All the kids would be like, "What are you, goth now? Like with the black jeans?"
Right.
Like that's what they would do.
Well, it's normal. Even look, facial hair is very in right now. I don't know your experience, but I can remember seeing some politicians grow facial hair, and it was like all anybody could talk about.
Anytime, Paul Ryan comes back to the Congress with a beard.
Oh, that's different. Yeah, but that's the point. You're right. But for kids, when we go back to the first part of our conversation, the anxiety, the depression, the inability to articulate, this inability to feel like we're a part of something because, well, one, we spend way too much time online as kids nowadays, but it's all of that.
Well, so you decide as a kid, because you're uncomfortable for whatever reason, and almost certainly you're going to grow out of it. That is the default.
Yes.
That is the facts.
Watch and wait.
That is the facts. There's a reason why Europe is turning its back on all this stuff, because it's all nonsense. But you're struggling. So you come to school and you're a boy and you dress like a girl and you decide to change your name, and you're in California where they're lunatics, and you don't tell your parents about this. But your peers are now referring to you as a girl and saying she and all that.
And being forced to do that, by the way.
Yes.
Let's this is also forced speech.
They'd take your kids away from you if they could, and in some cases that's starting to happen.
And this is happening here. There's a teacher in Round Rock that transitioned. It's a male teacher, teaches I think AP World History, and this year has now decided to dress like a woman and appropriate a woman, and they're forcing the kids and have lectured them, and you have to do this. There's a mom that came, she actually filmed a podcast. It was just like, this is wild, but they are being conditioned to. That
shouldn't be allowed.
It's wild.
No. I'm sorry, you can't be with kids anymore.
Right. No, right.
You got some trouble. Hey, it's a free society. I don't want you stoned to death, but you don't belong in the classroom anymore. You
go live your life outside of the classroom.
You have something going on. It's sexual in nature, fundamentally, definitionally.
Yes.
Why would we subject our kids to that?
Yeah.
What? Just like no. So the social pressure on our kids is really, really high. if they step out and then they get rewarded because now they're part of the intersexual coalition. Now
And
they're
you're
part
nice. And you're nice.
Oh yeah, no, you're caring. Now you're part of the good group. You're not
Yes.
cis or whatever.
Yeah.
What happens when they turn out that they outgrow that?
Mm.
What happens is they don't. The pressure to stay on course is great. That's why, and I interviewed Dr. Etan Haim. He was he's a surgeon. He was at the Texas Children's Hospital, the largest hospital in the world, kids hospital. They were defying the stated laws of the state of Texas and continuing to do hormone therapies and child mutilation. And he blew the whistle on it, and the Biden administration went after him. That case is still ongoing, even though the layers of crooked scam stuff going on here, it is immense. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But this is the forces that we as parents are up against in all of this. I don't want my kids subjected to this.
Neither do I.
No one reasonable should want their kids to be confused about their sexuality more than they already are, because it's super confusing and uncomfortable.
Or their developing body. Girls are the ones, apparently it's mostly autistic girls, or I shouldn't say mostly, the biggest rise is girls. And becoming a woman is hard.
I mean, one of the things that my wife told me that, as a man, I didn't really think about because I didn't experience it, was how painful it is to develop breasts. I don't mean physically painful, although maybe it's just uncomfortable, but the pain of you're starting to develop a figure and you notice some of the adults starting to look at you in a sexualized way. And again, this is not trying to say like, oh, there's creeps, but like, oh, your uncle, like you notice his eyes wander. That is like, oh no, I could totally understand a young girl being like, get these off my body.
Yeah.
And I understand that, but our job as the adults is to guide our kids through these difficult times and to be there to support them, but not necessarily to pander to every feeling they have in the moment, because our feelings are temporary.
Yeah.
And you can't be a reasonable person and say, my daughter's feeling of discomfort with her developing body, I should lean into that. This is her body.
Yeah.
I thought we were supposed to help our young girls love themselves and have comfort in their bodies, not to hate themselves and want to mutilate their bodies.
Or tell them it's abnormal. That's the whole thing is, I think that my job is, as a mother, is to protect my children, to provide for them, and to prepare them. And we're telling these other, crazy people that in preparing them for what happens naturally so you can go on to do the most wonderful thing in the world, in my opinion, which is to be a mother. I mean, it is the greatest thing in the world to be a mom. I would...
You do have the privilege. It's funny. We talk about the patriarchy, but no, what's never mentioned is like men never get to experience
Y'all don't get to experience it. And I laugh about this. Look, I work with a ton of men. All my bosses are men. And they knew, like, when I came to TPPF and we started the parent empowerment movement, tomorrow, for example, I'm like, I have to go get 30 preschoolers ready for the nativity play. My kids and I'm like, I'm gonna be gone for these hours. Bye. And they're like, okay. I mean, the patriarchy, one, I don't see it. It doesn't exist. But I've never experienced it, because the men that I'm around who love their families, who understand the importance of motherhood, are fathers themselves, and they want to lift that up. But I think that we are encouraging, whether it's the schools or radicals that have infiltrated through associations or education entities. We're not preparing young people, particularly young girls, to know, okay, this is what happens to your body. This is the transition, and it's uncomfortable, and there's going to be some weird moments and some things that you're like, well, what's going on here? But at the end of it, you will be ready when the time is right to have a baby. And that is the greatest thing you're ever going to experience in the world.
Unless
by far.
Unless you're struggling and your parents are worried about suicide because they've heard about the high incidence of suicide among people struggling with gender identity issues, and they go to the Texas Children's Hospital and get told, would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter?
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that has been told to parents at that institution and others, and it emanates out of radical Marxist gender ideology that wants to deconstruct and criticize everything, including the most basic binary of all of life, which is the gender binary.
Right.
Sex and gender, the notion that they're even different is word games.
Right.
You know, that's word games. No, there's no difference between sex and gender. Male, female, that's it. We even talk about the plug, male and female. It works a similar way for a reason.
Right.
Plants are male and female. They work a similar way for similar reasons. You know, the pollinator has the larger gametes, and the pollen flying around is going crazy. The female plant is way more discerning about which pollen it lets in than the male pollen.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff is
nature
baked into reality itself.
Right.
And yet we acquiesce, and I think maybe finally, and I know it's like the politics has too big a role in our society in general, but I do think that 2024 was one of the break points in a great way. You know, we're here in Texas, and we have a large Latino population. We have a lot of Mexican Americans. They don't like any of this stuff.
Right.
Latinx, get out of here.
That's the most ridiculous. Right.
You want to desecrate my language?
Right.
And turn it into some fluid nonsense? Scram.
Yeah.
So that.
And they went and voted that way.
Voted.
That's
they
right.
said, no,
were like,
we're not doing
right.
this.
Parents and particularly Hispanic, they were like, yeah.
They're Catholic.
No,
they're
I'm
family.
on this team.
Yeah, it's like they're family oriented. They're mostly Catholic. They don't want any of this stuff.
No.
So I think the thing
No
that
same parent does.
I think the thing is, if that's what you want for your kids, first of all, if you want to mutilate them, I'm not a big fan of Child Protective Services. I think there's a lot of bad stuff that happens with Child Protective Services. I kind of don't want the government to get involved in the family ever, even though there will be people who will abuse their kids, because Child Protective Services seems like an abuse racket. That being said, if you're going to sterilize your kid out of some weird whacked out ideology, how is that not child abuse?
Right. It is.
It's child abuse.
It is. It's child abuse.
So setting that off to the side as, I would say, criminal act, that's criminal action. That's abusing a child. But if you are super progressive and you want to deconstruct all this and that, and you want to raise your kids in your sort of principally secular ideology, fine. Don't make me pay for it. Or don't make me pay for it.
Don't make me pay for it, but you don't get to force. This is my thing, is people, yes, but here's what's going on. We know that far too many, and I'm not saying every public school, let me be clear. We've got a lot of excellent public schools across Texas, but there is enough of them that this is a crisis, and people have got to realize this. If you want to do that, fine. But don't trap my kids because I don't have the money to send them to a private school, or I'm on a wait list. There's 76,000 kids on a wait list for charter schools. You don't get to hold my children hostage and teach them nonsense that is counter to my values and counter to reality. And that's where I really have a huge problem with this. You do not get to force parents who don't agree with any of this secular, woke nonsense that's going on. You do not have a right to not only take my tax dollars, but then force me, because education is compulsory, and force me to send my kids where they are going to be indoctrinated with that wackadoo mentality.
Well, first of all, school is compulsory. I don't know about the education part. That's not a guarantee.
Well,
right?
that's, and what is the education?
You are compelled to go sit somewhere that we call a school.
Right.
Now, thank God in America, unlike in some places in Europe, including Germany, we have homeschooling.
Yes.
So you can legally homeschool your kids. You're still having your money ripped out of your pocket to pay for other people's kids to go to the school you don't want to send your kids to.
Right.
I'm a bigger critic of the existing infrastructure than most. I don't think public school as it's constituted is moral. I think it is an immoral institution. And what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, its origins, this country was built in its early days, in its first century, on voluntary, largely religious, one-room schoolhouses that were not operated by politics. They were not operated by the state. That was a relatively later stage development.
Mm-hmm.
It came about during the same time as all the rest of the wackadoo stuff came about, the progressive movement.
Mm-hmm.
These were the eugenicists. These were the Woodrow Wilson types.
Yeah.
Who was like the Claudine Gay of his time, from Harvard.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, he was
well, of course.
Woodrow Wilson, a vicious, heinous racist, eugenicist, probably caused World War II by the way he conducted World War I in the League of Nations. Bad dude, president of Princeton. We know this type. These are bad people. Or let me put that differently. These are people that are possessed by bad ideas.
Yeah.
They might. It's not me to judge if they're bad people or not, but their ideas are toxic.
Yes, their ideas are toxic, and they often have delusions of grandeur.
So, what was the idea of public school? It fundamentally emerged in Prussia, first and foremost. They were the spearhead, and the concept was, how do we indoctrinate the youth to fight our wars? Because the Germans, the Proto-Germans, the Prussians, lost to Napoleon, and the soldiers wouldn't stand their post. And so the early motivation for having state-run education was literally to indoctrinate the next generation of cannon fodder. That is why it's all pushed towards standardization, towards a kind of nationalism. And I love this country. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Although even the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a commie, so it's not my favorite thing, the Pledge of Allegiance. But literally that's true. It was a socialist that wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. But that was the actual ideology. Otto von Bismarck, King Ferdinand. These people constructed something to brainwash the children, to homogenize the children, and to turn them into an army for the state. Horace Mann and the early movement that advocated for public school coming out of Massachusetts, he was the first. He was like he's considered the father of public school. He was inspired by this Prussian proto-fascist vision of education. Now, he would say he wanted to lift everyone up, but lift everyone up in a homogeneous way in the service of the state. That ideology permeated the schools of education early. This history is the facts. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented facts. This is the way this came about. John Taylor Gatto wrote about this at length, but he's not the only one.
Weapons of
Mass Instruction.
Yes.
Must-read book.
Yes, it is.
So, the question you could ask is, yeah, but I went to public school and it was fine and it wasn't that big of a deal and I didn't come out turning into a little like soldier boy or whatever. And what about the 60s? And I don't, the latest turn from like being homogenous and being structured and being statist to being woke and even more wacky. That's like second order phenomenon from the core sin of trying to separate kids from their parents. Separate them from their culture, from their society. The other motivating force for public school and making it free was that it came about at a time when there was a rise of Catholic immigrants, first the Irish, then the Italians, and the overwhelmingly Protestant and sort of Anglo-Nordic Americans didn't like that. Who are these papists? Do they have allegiance to the country? We need to they're setting up their own schools. They're a fifth column in our country. This was in the good old days where people would actually say what they believed instead of mask it in fluffy, fuzzy, happy time language like DEI. The old labor unions used to just straight up say like, well, we want to raise the minimum wage to keep blacks out of the labor force. They used to just say it. They didn't hide like, no, we want to lift wages for all workers. It's like, no, we want to keep blacks out because they're coming up from the South and we want to keep them out of our factories. They used to just say that, you AFL-CIO. That's the history. It was indoctrinate the kids, make them into little soldier boys and girls, and if we can destroy these damn dirty Catholics and get them to be real Americans and pledge allegiance to the flag, not to the Pope, we should do that too. Let's give it away for free. Nothing's ever free. Let's tax you here and then spend your money there, and extract as much as we can along the way.
Yeah.
So what does that result in? Aside from it, that results in a monopoly. That results in a government monopoly, the likes of which there is no equivalent in the private sector. There is no industry more monopolized by a single entity than K through 12 is by the government.
Yeah. That's right.
Monopolies suck. So what happens when you have a monopoly where you don't have free entry and exit, where I can't say, you know what, I don't like the iPhone, I'm going to buy a Samsung, and I vote with my feet. I have to vote with my voice. My voice is much lower resolution than my feet, because when I walk out the door, you don't have my money anymore.
Right.
So you're not forcing me to do anything.
And that's why they're fighting against ESAs, right?
That is correct. They don't want us to be able to vote with our feet. They want us to be at each other's throats in the voting booth. They want us to be divided by the basis of values that are often irreconcilable. I might want to send my kids to a very different kind of school than you do.
Right.
And instead of us just doing that, the same way we shop at different stores and we buy different clothes and we eat different food
We
and
sit
we
in
go on different
pews.
vacations.
Yes.
And we buy different technology and different cars and different every single thing in our entire life is different.
Yeah.
We have choices.
Yep.
We get to exit the store we don't like. Not K through 12.
Right.
How dare you? How dare you apply the forces that work for literally everything, including putting food on the table, which is more important than education, is to be able to have 3 meals a day and live. I need food before I need education. We have food choice.
Yep.
We got problems in our food choices, but we got a lot of choice.
Yep.
Go to the supermarket. Go to the supermarket with an immigrant from Cambodia so you can be reminded what it feels like to actually have food choices.
Right.
That's the problem. If I had my druthers, there would be no government-operated schools at all. Sell them off. They don't need to operate the buildings. The problem is bureaucracy, because we all experience this because we experience it when we work in relatively large organizations. Bureaucracy is inherent in large organizations. Why? Because you have 2 choices for how to make sure the right thing happens. You have trust in people's judgment, or you have process put down on paper. So we put processes down on paper when we don't trust the judgment of the people acting. That is why we create instructions. That is why we have contracts. We put the things down on paper so that we can overcome the uncertainty of trust that you will do the thing that you're saying you're going to do, or that you even know what the right thing to do is. That's rules, process, bureaucracy, or discretion. Now, when you have constant feedback to do better, which is what freedom and competition creates, you end up with a lot of people that have pretty good judgment, because otherwise they get flushed out of the system. When you have a monopoly, you don't have that. It's, you could call it market discipline, but if you don't like market, you could just call it evolutionary process. You don't have that learning of, oh, I tried this in my classroom and it didn't work, and the teacher and nobody wants to be in my class next year, and they can't be forced into my class. So now I'm out of a job because no one's taken my class. When you don't have that teaching everyone in the system in this sort of automatic kind of way, you need to write all these rules down. And then you need people to administer the rules. And then you need people to update the rules in keeping with the prior rules. And then you need people to and then you get lobbyists that want their version of the rules put in the official rules.
There it is.
So now I have this one set of rules for 90% of all of the kids in the country at the federal level. And guess what? It's relatively efficient to spend some money to put your rule into that book, as opposed to get every single bottom-up school like what built America to adopt your cockamamie idea about DEI.
Right.
If I can get DEI into the one book,
That's right.
man, I'll spend $1 billion for that, and that's chump change. And that is the structural problem. It is not escapable. You can't simply invest in the schools to make them better while keeping them a monopoly. That doesn't work. It can't work. It has never worked. It never will work. The people advocating that are liars. They want to keep you trapped in a prison built by the guys that build the prison, by the way.
And that fund the bonds and the PACs.
And they're taking all the money for themselves.
And the lobbyists.
And they're saying they care about your kids, but then they want to lock them out of school when things happen, and they don't care about your kids at all.
Right. And they don't trust you to raise your kids because you can't make the choice. They're all going to make the choice. They're going to draw the boundary lines. If you live here, they're going to draw the boundary lines. They're going to tell you how much you're going to pay in taxes. Oh, well, no, they're not going to tell you how much they're going to pay. They're going to rig the system and then lie on the ballot so you have no idea. They're going to talk about property rates instead of property taxes. It's a whole boondoggle.
They are the worst dairy farmers we've ever seen. So, dairy farmers are really interesting to me because you really have to keep the cows healthy to be highly productive. And so and I think in general in our agriculture sector, I've spent a lot of time with I've spent a lot of time for like a city boy filmmaker with agriculture folks and farmers in the heartland of this country.
Yeah.
And they understand the animals in profound ways that most people don't.
Okay.
And dairy farmers in particular really face a really quick trade-off if their cows are unhealthy, not being productive. This school system is like the worst dairy farmer in the world. They see our kids and us as milk producers to extract from, and so long as we don't literally die, they're fine because they're stuck. So they'll beat us to near death, but so long as there's a drop of milk to extract, they're going to take it, and they're going to make sure we can be literally in just a stone cage, and they're perfectly fine so long as they can get any last bit of milk out of us. That's how they treat us. And like this will always probably be a battle until we really radically enable school choice in a way that also protects our schools from being taken over.
Yeah.
Because the one thing I do worry about a little bit, and I think ESAs are structured in a way to protect us from this, is what comes next. So let's imagine we get universal ESAs here in Texas, which is what we should all want.
Yes.
And if you love your local school, well, it's on you to answer the question, why don't other people love it if they all leave? If they all leave, then the school's not good. Where they'll leave to is a bigger challenge in the short run, but over time that will work itself out. We're going to have activists say, you're taking my tax dollars to give to this Bible-thumping school. How dare you? We need to have standards. We need to have requirements. This is our tax dollars. What about separation of church and state? Now, it turns out that this is the way every kind of thing like this has always worked. You can take your Pell Grants and your student loans backed by the government and go to any school you want. You can go to Liberty University with government-backed student loans. You can go to just about any grocery store with your SNAP card. So they don't have a leg to stand on, but we shouldn't pretend that they're not going to come at us with everything they've got and try to take over our Christian and Catholic schools and raise the barriers to homeschooling. This is live or die for them because this is the dirty game they play. They can't fight us on ideas. They can't fight us on history. So they just want to go after the vulnerable and get our kids.
Yep.
They're just creeps. And they want to go after our kids, and they'll do everything in their power to do it forever. And so we just have to be vigilant, and the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.
That's 100%. I get those questions as someone with a healthy distrust of government. I'm the same way, and making sure, obviously, that the education savings accounts to be passed that need to be universal here in Texas have the strongest, strictest protections for homeschooling and private schools. And it does require vigilance for all parents, just like parents came out and voted in lockstep this past election season to say this is what we're demanding. It will require vigilance because the protections are there. Something that I really, encourage people when they ask that. I'm right there with you. We have to protect it and we have to be vigilant. And Ronald Reagan said when he was talking about freedom that it is not, he said, freedom is not passed through our bloodstream and is not handed down to our children through our blood. It must be handed down to them and protected and fought for. Or one day we will spend our golden years having to explain to them what America was like when it was once free. And here's why that is so important when he talks about the golden years and kind of my mission is my kids are in an amazing school. I love it. And we are able to worship where we want. We are able to send them to school where we want. I am blessed. I look down the road, my golden years. If we in Texas and quite frankly across America continue to allow these far leftists to indoctrinate our children, to create the divisive mentality that they are creating, the anxiety, the fear that big daddy government's going to save you, that all of this. If we allow this to continue, these children will grow up. They will not understand the foundation of Western civilization and what has made America the greatest, most benevolent, most prosperous nation that's ever existed in the face of the entire world. And they will vote along the lines of leftists. And you know what happens? We can look to Portland, Oregon and see. We can look to other far leftist places where they do try and outlaw homeschooling, inject their nonsense into the private schools. They could already do that. The only reason that Texas doesn't allow that is because we are vigilant and because the legislature is made up of conservatives that say we're not doing that. If you don't think there's not a whole host of crazy liberals already there right now, Democrats, that would love to stop homeschooling or put regulations, that would love to vote to put regulations on private school, you're wrong. And if we allow the takeover of the electoral process, which is also what they're trying to do, and rig elections and things like that, and we allow the young people, the next generation, to grow up thinking somehow that America is not the very best in the world, they will make decisions based on fear and ignorance that will impact our golden years.
I think that one thing that I was so happy to see, and I'm not like entrenched in the play-by-play of all of the political movements. I'm an ideological guy. I'm a morals and ethics driven person more than I am like a political driven person. Political meaning like particular candidates and this guy versus that guy or this girl versus that girl. It was so heartening to see that Governor Abbott stood for parents' rights, stood for parental empowerment, stood up against the outside forces of darkness and grifting and destruction that have backed so-called Republicans and conservatives here, but are actually just, the people they think they can manipulate.
Right.
He stood up against those people. We had candidates that support our right to send our kids to the school that we want to send them to. And given that you've already taken the money from us to begin with, right. State of Texas, county of Travis. And so now we have more school choice support, I think, than we've ever had, right? We're in a position as a state where we can actually make this happen.
Yes. But the dark forces are not giving up.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to look at and make sure to keep on our radar as conservatives, as people who believe in sort of the American, when we even call ourselves conservatives in America, I think it's interesting because we don't want to conserve an aristocracy.
Right.
We don't want to conserve a ruling elite. American conservatives are distinct. I think they're historically properly understood as liberals because the American creed, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the individual freedom and sovereignty and sanctity that we both care about, and the community and the bottom-up nature of community and faith, those are actually like old school, like classical liberal principles. And as is always the case with the propagandists on the left, they take every nice, pretty word. Ooh, liberal, open, tolerant. I want that word.
Yeah.
I'll import it and I'll turn it into statism and destruction.
Yep.
Instead, progress. I'll take that word and I'll turn that into returning to tribal barbarism and communism. But so we want to conserve something special, and that is the sovereignty of the individual in the face of the state, in the face of everything else, that the state exists to protect the sovereign individual.
Yeah.
And the things that we build as free people, our families, our communities, our churches, our schools. The Democratic Party has become like it has an autoimmune disease. And that is, autoimmune disease is this category that's weird. It's basically, I'm going to get out of my skis a little bit here, but autoimmune disease broadly is this like category of things that we don't really understand, but it seems like the body's attacking itself, and we don't really know why. We don't really know why people have alopecia. We don't really know why we have this rise in allergies of all this and that.
Yeah.
One of the things, though, that does seem to be the case with a lot of autoimmune disease is it is actually the product of hypersterility, of lack of diversity properly understood. So, like, for example, and Johns Hopkins has actually conducted research around this, you can actually reverse a lot of autoimmune disease by reintroducing parasites like worms into your body.
Yeah.
And the theory is that our immune system co-evolved with all kinds of parasites. And now we've stripped them all away through deworming and medicine and vaccines and this and that. And so now we live in bubble. Now we're like bubble boy. We don't have enough. Our immune system is essentially evolved to be attacking more enemies than it currently has. Yeah. And so it starts to turn on itself. I think the Democratic Party, because it became a complete monopoly in higher education, it has a complete monopoly in most of K through 12. Yep. And then, but also in the newsrooms of America, which vote to a higher percentage Democrat than like Berkeley, California did.
Yeah.
It's like the newsroom, not even the opinion section, the newsroom votes like 92, 95% Democrat. And we're told this is supposed to be objective or journalism. I came out of entertainment. Entertainment's overwhelmingly Democrat left. So what happens? And I think Texas has to be careful. We have to be careful in this state, because when you're like a single party place, you can get the autoimmune political disease and just become like a kind of monstrous version of yourself. That's what happened to the Democrats. Yeah. California is like a monstrous Hunger Games hellscape with the worst inequality in the whole country, and people defecating on the streets and ripping kids from their parents and letting them gender change without letting them. I mean, it's like hell. It's like, what is happening? And it's just because it became a political monoculture, and now it has, self-destructive political autoimmune disease. We can't let that happen in Texas.
Agree.
We have to like keep our Republicans' feet to the fire and not let them get lazy and not let them sort of become Republican in name only, or have what it means to be Republican get weird. And next thing you know, what's become of our state? Because I think there's a lot there are reasonable people who are Democrats as individuals.
Sure.
A lot of them, maybe most of them, probably most, who look at the radicalism and say, what is that? What are you doing now?
And then they look around, they go, do we have to do this? We saw this with the gender mutilation bill, where a courageous representative, Sean Theory from Houston, a black mother, was like, whoa, no. And she tells the story publicly. I had my colleagues come say, just hold your nose, Sean. Just hold your nose and take the vote. And she's like, this is not, but they are for, it's if you want the machine. And they came after her and they unseated her with maybe a good person. I don't know who, but someone that's willing to toe the wackadoo party line of let's mutilate children. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think there's a broad consensus for a reasonable amount of common sense in this country.
I agree.
Still.
That's what the parent empowerment movement is about.
Yeah.
We don't have to all agree. It's choices. Vote with your feet. Go where you want to be. Send your child to the school that best serves you. If you want to do an amazing acting academy, if you want to do a classical Christian school or a Catholic school, if you want to start your own school, if you want to do a learning pod, if you want to, whatever, you have the most vested interest in your children's success in life.
I interviewed a woman named Catherine Burble Singh. She's considered the strictest headmistress in London. She runs a school called Michaela.
Okay.
It is akin to a charter school. It's sort of like their version of a charter school. So
Okay.
she runs it. I think she's the founder of it. And she is a tough cookie. And I met her at this conference called ARC last fall, 23. And she gave this incredible talk about small c conservative values. And she's got this school that's situated in essentially a very like poor area of London. And like most of the kids that go to the school are first generation immigrant families. They're all like Black and brown kids, mostly from Africa and the Middle East and you know, native born, you know, white kids and whatever. But it's like a hodgepodge mix.
Yeah.
It's everything that DEI people would claim
They want. But not there because
No. All the
she's-
DEI,
right,
all the
she's
DEI
strict
people,
and she's going to force them to learn.
all the DEI people hate her because they're all actually just commie zombies. She's super strict, dress code, silence in the hallways.
Yeah.
She's hard on these kids.
Yeah.
They rise to the occasion. They have the highest grades in the entire country.
Yeah.
They're going to Oxford. We as a creature have this enormous range of potential. We can become degenerates and criminals, or we can become Einstein. And if we just sleepwalk into the choice of where our kids are going to spend most of their time, what do you think is going on when you don't take the choice seriously? This is where our kids spend most of their time, school.
Yeah.
And as they get older, their peers that they meet at school become the dominant force in their lives. The middle school, which my son called the Hunger Games, this is where all the hormones, all the like identity formation, middle school's a nightmare. You know, there's a reason why all the rites of passage historically, like bar and bat mitzvah and Catholic confirmation and tribal rites of passage of going out to slay a lion, they're all right around 13 years old. It's, you know, it's when our daughters become able to get pregnant. Like there's a bunch of stuff going on and it all lines up right over middle school age. And it turns middle school into a total disaster that's inescapably crazy.
Yeah. I like that. The Hunger Games.
You know, but then they cross over and they're starting to be young adults and they're thinking for themselves and they're turning to their peers more than they are to us. And it's really, really
I was
painful.
to say, I'm like listening. Oh,
It's very, very
not
difficult. But one of the things we can do as parents, to the best of our ability, and if the state passes universal ESAs, they will empower us to do it to a greater extent than ever before.
Yeah.
Is pick that environment for them. To use our values, use our judgment, and say, this matters. I shouldn't helicopter over my kids. I shouldn't try to like force them to be what I want them to be. I can't do that. They will rebel. But I do have to make the choice of where they spend their time. And I have to be responsible for that choice. And if I fail to make that choice, I'm being derelict in my duty as a parent. I have to take responsibility for that. And I think we as a body politic can take the money that we're already taking from you and give it back so that it's in your hands. And if you're not for that, you're for bad. You're not for good. You're for bad. You're for political monopoly corruption. You're for political divisiveness. You're for keeping us trapped in places we don't want to be so that we fight with each other so that you can control us. And that's it. That's all there is to it. You can come at me with everything you got. I've seen all this. You have too. We know who these people are. We know what they want. They say what they want.
Yeah. And
they showed their face with COVID. And I think the state is standing up and saying, okay, we're done with that. We're done. We're done with that.
That's
so
right.
we got to go hard so that we get the best version of this that we possibly can.
That's right.
And absolutely brutalize any politician that stands in the way and then defend it every year, every vote, all the time, forever. I wish it wasn't the case, but
It is the case.
That's the case.
That's right. And that's why it's the parent empowerment movement. It's not the school choice movement, because this doesn't end.
No.
This doesn't end. We will always have to fight against these evil forces because they've been around since the beginning of time. And it is up to us to be vigilant. It is up to us to select the environment of which we want our children to be in, the peers that they are going to be around. This is why it is so vital. And we're blessed that we do have great leadership. I mean, the governor has just taken this mission
he sure has.
And driven it forward in a way that I don't think we've seen anywhere across the country. And it is to be commended and praised. And I hope that those forces, particularly that walk the halls of the Capitol, that hand out the political checks, that collect the taxpayer money, that those people can see this is not the winning place to be because the parents have risen up and said, we've had enough. The patriots have risen up and said, we've had enough. We're taking back control. It's our responsibility. It's our right. We are now the ultimate authority and decision maker in our child's lives and education.
I mean, one of the things that, needs to be remembered about what makes America unique is I'm an adoptive Texan by choice. I moved here in 2011. I voted with my feet. That's federalism. That is these United States.
Yeah.
In the aftermath of the Civil War, these became for obvious reasons, culturally, to try to bring unity to a divided country. But structurally, the brilliance of the country was that it was these. And that the notion that you should have a competition of ideas about how to govern itself was paramount. That's why the federal government was basically a tiny thing.
Yep.
The Constitution, which constitutes the federal government, fits in a little pocketbook, and it's thin, and you can read it all in one bus ride for a reason. Surely, if it's good enough for America's structure of government, it's good enough for us as parents that we should be able to walk with our feet. We should be able to vote with our feet. We should be able to choose, just like the state we choose to live in, the school we send our kids to, and the school where the tax dollars that we are forced to contribute moves with us. That's just, the argument against that is an argument for a broken status quo that I think is heartless, that leaves the poor behind the most because rich people already have school choice.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But I think poor, rich, everyone benefits from our schools having to compete on the creation of value and mastery and diversity. And for one of the things that's that I've talked about and had great guests on, like Christina Hoff Sommers, who wrote The War Against Boys, and others, and Warren Farrell. Traditional school and the traditional educational experience is deeply rigged against boys.
Yes.
Very profoundly so. It starts with the fact, and these days we now kind of see just how wacky this is, this notion that you can't even know what a boy or a girl is, or that they aren't different fundamentally, biologically. This is all crazy town nonsense. But boys are more physical, they're more thing-oriented. Girls, these are all averages. They're not applicable in any individual circumstance, but when you look at it as a group, they emerge very clearly. Every parent knows this. Boys are physical, rough and tumble play, things, trucks, Legos, like that was my favorite toy, climbing trees, falling out of them. Girls are more verbal. They're more social. They're both equally aggressive, but the boys are physically aggressive. Girls are socially aggressive. Girls try to destroy your reputation. Boys try to destroy your face.
Yeah.
These are facts. When we have to be told from kindergarten to sit still, that's anti-boy.
Yeah.
Boys don't want to sit still. Boys need to run around like puppies. When school shrinks the amount of physical time so that you're sitting, listening to a lecture. Boys hate that. Boys don't want that. It's bad for boys. We have seen the collapse of physicality in school. We have seen the rise of it being more and more rigged towards girls. It's already the case that 7 to 8 out of 10 teachers are women.
Yep.
Then we have the fact that we have 1 in 4 to 1 in 4 to 1 in 3 boys don't have a dad in the house. So I don't have a male role model. I got all this crazy energy. I'm distracted. And I go to a place, it's all women except for the football coach, but I'm in first grade, so I'm not playing football. And I'm being told I'm bad.
Right.
And then every so often the teachers come in with a t-shirt saying the future is female on it, or talk about the patriarchy. It's like, hi, I'm 9.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in charge of anything. I'm a little boy who's innocent and who wants to have a good future just like everybody else. What are you talking? I guess I'm bad. I guess I'm a terrible person. I guess.
Or if you do say it, here's some Ritalin.
Right. And so I'm acting out because this isn't built for me, and it's uncomfortable and it sucks.
Yeah.
And I'm medicated for it. So that's just an example. So then what happens? We're seeing some of the ways that this happened. We started the conversation talking about our anxious kids. The anxiety and depression is accelerating on the girls' side, but boys and girls are cleaving away from each other along a lot more dimensions. And so relationship formation is breaking down.
Yeah.
Because
they're not dating or going to dances
they're not going to dances. They're coming out
wanting to get married.
It's crazy. It's like it's not a mystery why fertility in this country is falling.
Right.
We can see it firsthand when you have the collapse of the vision of masculine and feminine as real and complementary. You're going to get nonsense. You're going to get pathology. When you start telling the girls from an early age that the boys are terrible and that they're part of the patriarchy, they're going to hate them. Mm-hmm. And you know what the boys are going to do in response? They're going to hate them back. This is the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment that we are imposing on our boys and girls who should be in it together.
Yeah.
And when they're not in it together, we either live together or we die apart.
Yeah. Which is what's happening. Well, you can see it. We can see it with marriage rates. We can see it with the decline in children. And something that, I'm glad you brought this up about boys. We have a whole generation of lost boys, and we know this. We can see it. They've been emasculated. They've been medicated. They've been denigrated. And even, one of the things that's really important for people to understand about the education savings accounts is that 90% of our kids in high school are within a 30-minute drive to a career and technical college or junior college. So TSTC, those 90%. Talking about what boys like to do. This mentality that permeated from the long march to the institutions to we have to capture the minds of the youth. They must go to four-year school. It's a human right, don't you know? It's a human right that you go to college, you get a four-year degree, you study all this wackadoo gender studies nonsense. And boys are like, what? I don't want to do this. But the problem is they're either dropping out or they're failing to launch. You talked about that from the beginning. The education savings accounts say, hey kids, particularly the boys, we have a workforce gap. The Texas Workforce Commission have found it it's hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's 10,000 plumbers we're not going to have in Texas by 2030. 8,000 electricians, 6,000 HVAC workers, oil and gas workers. The
median ages on all these things are rapidly approaching 60.
And these kids, these guys, they're like, I just want to work in shop class. Do some schools have shop class? Sure, they do. We have 1,200 school districts. Thousands of schools. Does 5 of them having shop class meet the needs of millions of these kids around this? No, it does not. So the education savings accounts are awesome because you can go, these kids, particularly our young males that want to get out. They want to be in diesel mechanics or HVAC making $90,000 when they come out of high school, by the way, with zero debt. They can do that. They can say, I'm going to utilize an ESA and I'm going to go to TSTC or I'm going to go to this junior college or I'm going to go do that and I'm going to train for this. And when I graduate high school and when I graduate with my certification, I'm going to launch. And then maybe I'll go find a woman and have a baby because that's the best. I mean, like all of it. And you're just like, this is so empowering to the next generation of Texas, particularly our boys. And one more stat I'll throw out at you is the TPER data found that, and this goes back to, I get a lot of people like, well, what happened before COVID? I'm going to go back to 2019, pre-COVID. Texas public schools graduated 55,000 to be exact, 355,000 kids out of our public high schools. They went back and looked and found 6 months later that 32% of those kids, mostly male, 32% of those kids were not in higher education, the workforce, or in the military 6 months after they have graduated high school. Where are they and what are they doing?
Yeah, this is a really profound thing that I think was part of what happened at the election, at the voting booth in November, because there's something like 7 million prime working age males, which is what the economists like to say, who aren't in the labor force. Now, I put the scare quotes here because the unemployment statistics are in place basically starting in the aftermath of the Great Depression. We didn't used to measure this stuff. We didn't measure GDP. Even the notion, people don't realize something about how much stats lie and liars make statistics. And that is that we say things like the economy grew 1.9%, 2.3%. There were 347,422 jobs created by the this or that bill. That's all nonsense. That's literally nonsense. If you talked about these things in the public discourse accurately and stripped out the fake science,
right,
you'd say the economy grew around 2-ish%. That's what you would say.
Right.
You'd say unemployment is around, well, right now we're told it's around 4%, except that if you include the 7 million people that aren't in the workforce that are work-age males, it'd be double that. And then you say, well, what does that even mean? What does it mean to be 32 years old and a man and not physically ill to the point where you can't work?
Right.
So you're not necessarily on SSDI, Social Security Disability, or maybe you are, but you don't need to be. You're trapped there. And you're just not looking for work. You're living off your girlfriend or you're living in your parents' house. Like, you're unemployed.
Right.
And if we treated unemployment as it was intended, which was during the Great Depression, we have depression levels of unemployment in this country. There was no idea in the 1930s and 40s that a man 30 years old isn't unemployed if he's not working or in school or in the military.
Right.
You're unemployed.
You're unemployed. Go work. And you're not going to be fed unless you go work. But now this goes back to what you were talking about, the bureaucracy. Bureaucracies just want to keep themselves going, right? I mean, this is kind of
well, the people in them want to get promoted.
Right.
So then you need growth.
Right.
So
you need to grow. So grow more people getting this. So now they keep expanding all the different things that qualify for disability to include anxiety and depression, which is starting in our K-12 system.
And is actually created and magnified by being unemployed.
Right.
So paying people not to work when they have anxiety and depression, that especially for men, but not exclusively, will make it worse. These are just the structural problems that we have to work on in our society if we're going to dig ourselves out of the hole we're in. And we are in a hole in a lot of ways. And I think that to me, it's like you have to go back to basics. It's like, what is driving the core parts of our life to either work or not work? Starting with our relationships, then with the basics: food, housing, clothing, education, healthcare. When you look at the things that are driving the costs up, it's all kinds of corrupt, crony, big government with its special interest companies rigging the system, telling us one thing and doing the opposite. And something's got to give.
Yeah.
And I think it all comes, and if we don't have a truly educated population, if we don't have a school and system, this whole thing about system this and system that is also a scam. I don't want a school system.
Nope. I don't either.
I don't want any system. The only system I want is liberty. I want the system known as human freedom and dignity, that we have to be persuasive if we want to get other people to come to our side. That's all I want.
Not just persuasive. I would say it's more than that, because that to me is where we're seeing a lot of the problem, because it's not just persuasive. We have to be productive. We actually
Yes.
have to produce
Yes.
what we are trying to persuade you. And people are real smart. Parents are real smart. They can see, are my kids learning to read with phonics or not?
Right.
But to go back to what, this is something that I don't think that people, particularly here in Texas, realize when we're talking about, you named off a whole host of things that everybody has. I mean, that's just our basic concerns in life, right? That we educate our children, that we have housing over our head, that we have clothes on our back. Okay, education. So something that people don't realize when we talk about this massive explosion of the system that is set up to trap you if you don't have the money to get out, which a lot of middle class and even upper middle class people don't. Think about Catholic family. My husband is one of 12 children. I have, on average, somewhere between 5 and 7 children per sibling. I mean, and it's wonderful, but they do not want to send their children to the system where they live around Dallas. And we all understand why, right? But even having a good income, you can't afford to send your child to the private school that they would like to send them to. So this system locks lower and middle and even upper middle class into where we're telling you have to go. What they don't tell you as they're running these bonds. So Houston went for $4.4 billion.
Yeah, this is
Prosper
all Ponzi
went for
schemes.
That's right. It is a Ponzi scheme. They don't tell you, if you go back and look to see who's funding these bonds, you can go to Transparency USA and see it really doesn't cost that much money. They're investing, $10,000 to $15,000 per massive architecture, construction engineering firm to put out, the yard signs of prosper for the kids or whatever, so we can build you a $120 million football stadium and run your property taxes up. And right? They are enslaving our children. And what they also don't tell you in the research is a lot of these firms, these big firms, the largest firm, they advertise that they are the largest K through 12 school builder in Texas, was purchased by a DC private equity firm about 2.5 years ago. They were purchased by private equity out of state to own this firm who comes and invests in our bonds that drive up our property taxes so that we are not free.
Well, this...
it's a boondoggle.
It points to something that, in some ways, for all the things we talked about, we didn't maybe talk about quite as much, and we should. And that's that education is about acquiring knowledge and knowing what to do with it. And some of the most educated, most potent thinkers of our time had nothing but a set of books to read for themselves. They didn't have fancy buildings. Buildings don't teach you things. Construction projects don't teach you things. There's no reason for education to be expensive.
Right. 100%. It's these profiteers that have...
Well, when you have a big pot of money in a government monopoly, all manner of nonsense will come about. And I'm a capitalist. I'm for profit.
Me too.
But profit needs to be earned.
That's right.
Not extracted from the public indirectly by teaming up with people that stole it. To me, when you're doing that, you look more like the guys that you're a racketeer is what you are.
Yeah.
You took some stolen goods and now you're selling it on the street.
Yeah.
And I think that we can bemoan those people, but they're an inescapable consequence of the system being the way it is. Right. I think the next phase, let's imagine that we get what we want and we get real school choice in this state. The work that we have to do then, as parents and as advocates, is to really spend time, and I do this a lot on our show on Dad Saves America. I interview actual educators, people running schools, people like Catherine Burblesing or Jeff and Laura Sandifer with Acton Academy, or I have Father Daniel O'Mullane from this great, Catholic classical school in New Jersey, and how he's doing Catholic school differently, but within the diocesan context. It's still a diocesan school, because there's schools that are inspired by Catholicism that aren't technically diocese schools.
Right.
And then there's the diocese schools, which frankly, a lot of times look a little too much like standard public school.
Yep.
With theology class. And then often theology class isn't that great. It's like, there's a lot better ways to come at the faith than this. I think it's a really great time for us to ask the kind of questions, to put ourselves in the beginner's mind. So a good friend of mine, Michael Strong, education innovator, he runs a website school called the Socratic Experience. He pointed out in a conversation I had with him that, you have kids, that when they're little, why is their first favorite word,
yes.
no being their second favorite word. Why this, why that, why? They're always asking questions. They're curious.
Yes.
Curiosity is the seed of learning,
yeah.
because I want to know, and then I want to ask why and how does that work, and why is it that way? Why is it that way? Only a couple of years in school, and the number of times kids ask a question goes to 0. This has been looked at. The amount of times kids ask questions declines rapidly the longer they're in traditional school. Because you're not asking why. You're sitting being lectured at.
Right.
That's not education to me.
Yeah.
You need knowledge. You need to learn facts. You need to build a foundation. And Catherine Birbelsing talks about this in our conversation a lot. You need skills. Before you, I think there's lots of different modes, and not every kid is going to thrive in the same mode.
Right.
Some are going to love Montessori, where you have sort of goals, you're given the work to do this week, and you're given large blocks of time to self-direct. And some can be even more radical. There's the Sudbury schools that come out of the Northeast, where literally you can do whatever you want. You can sit around and just play on your Game Boy all day if you want. You probably won't. And the reason why you might not is because there's self-selection in some of these things. So the kind of parent that puts their kid in
right.
Sudbury is pretty actively engaged.
Yes.
And so there's other things going on there.
Yes.
Maybe you need a lot of structure. Maybe you need a lot of physicality. Maybe you need a lot of Socratic discourse and a lot of dialogue. Almost in all cases, I would argue, you should be in mixed age environments. What we have as standard school, and I don't say this to denigrate large scale farmers, because I know this is a little bit of like a dirty word, but it's factory farming. It's factory farmed education. We need to do this at a large scale. And so we need to make sure all of the little chickens are the same size so that they can fit them on the hooks.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And so that's never going to work. It can't work.
Right.
But I think we need to habitualize asking why to ourselves. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves as adults. What are you doing now in your life? What in your past set you up to do the thing you're doing now? And let's look at the things that you like that you do. Where did that start? Like, where did you get your first exposure to the thing you love? Maybe it was school, maybe it was a teacher. Was that the majority of the experience, or was that the outstanding one? Why? Was it outside of school? There's a lot of successful people that really made school themselves, even while they had to put up with going to school all day long.
Right.
I'm one of those people. I didn't have video classes. I started teaching myself how to do video at home.
Yeah.
Because I liked it.
Right.
And so my dad got a video camera. And then I started making videos for class projects. And then when it started to be possible to edit the video in the computer, I became obsessed with that.
Yeah.
And to this day, it's like, I'm reading about the latest plugin for the new Final Cut or this or that. But like, that wasn't school, but it's learning.
Right.
It's education. It's my career.
And it's a constant.
So that this notion that school is education has to be broken out of our culture. The notion that education happens just in this window until you're old enough to go out and go into the workforce is wrong, and we know it. These are things that are like the echoes of this hyper-structured Prussian prison system that we call school. And when we break free of that, I think we will end up, that is the next frontier for us once we have education savings account. Because now the question is, okay, I'm going to get $7,500 towards the school, and my kid doesn't like the school he's in. Well, what school should I put him in?
Yes.
What school is my daughter going to actually thrive in?
Right.
How do I know if I'm making the right choice? And here's what I would say to parents thinking about this. And I think this is really, really important. You're going to fail, and failure's great.
I agree. It is.
You're going to put your kids in a
learn
school,
more.
and they're going to struggle. There is some instances where falling behind is real and is a real thing to be worried about. Most of the time you hear your kid is falling behind, it's actually nonsense. Falling behind who? What is this race? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Who am I racing against that I'm falling behind? The other people in my class because we happen to have similar birthdays? That never made any sense at all. That's factory farming. Make sure the chickens fit on the rack. Most education happens in mixed groups.
Yeah.
This has been the truth all of human history until 5 minutes ago, that we were in mixed groups of people like we are for the rest of our lives. For the rest of our lives. You start a job and you're the new guy or girl. And are you the same age as everyone else who's new that just started in that quarter? Obviously not. Right. Like, yes, there's stages of development. There's things that are more appropriate at different ages. I'm not saying that doesn't exist at all. But at Acton, 1st through 5th grade is in one room together.
Yeah.
Then middle school is in one room together. And then high school was in one room together. That's closer to reality than what we have now, where, if you were born in September, you're a 1st grader, but if you were born on October 1st, now you're a kindergartner. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense at all. That doesn't make any sense. We just take it, we just assume it because life is complicated and I don't want to question everything and I don't want to ask why 50 million times a day. So you're going to make a bunch of mistakes. Your kids are going to struggle. That's okay. They're going to be fine. They don't need you to solve every problem. They need to confront more problems. They need to learn that they're going to survive when they screw up and they fail and they don't get the job done right and they don't like it and it's hard and they can't make friends and it's hard. You're there so that they know they've got somewhere to come back to that loves them. Yeah. But love can turn into smothering real fast. And so try to pick an environment that you think is going to work well for them, pay attention to it, and then back the hell off and see how they do. Mm-hmm. And then if they thrive, awesome, you did it. If they don't,
go somewhere else. Figure out another environment.
It's just like going to work at a job.
That's right.
And don't beat yourself up over it.
Yeah.
The other thing
They're very resilient.
They're very resilient. The other thing is, and every parent knows this, they kind of are who they are too. Mm-hmm. So don't go too hard against the grain of the kind of person your child is. They are people from day one. My son he was more spirited now he's kind of like a stoic compared to his crazy, psychotic, spirited self when he was little. But in so many ways, he's exactly the same. He was the person he was.
Yeah. Yeah. You said that's right. I feel like we could talk all day. But John, this has been incredible. You are just a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate everything that you do in your podcast, Dad Saves America. For all of our viewers, if you are not familiar with it, please go check it out. I get so much inspiration from you of discussions to talk about. So thank you, and continue to fight for our kids in Texas. Before we wrap up, I would love for you to look in that camera right there.
Sure.
The biggest battle for our future is coming up in the next legislative session. Parents across the state have got to stand together to fight for the future of our kids. What would you say to the parents, the patriots, and the legislators who will be making decisions for the children of Texas particularly for ESAs?
Well, think real hard about what kind of person and what motivation drives the kind of person that wants you to have fewer choices in your life. Who wants that? I'm pretty sure you want more choices in your life, not less. I'm pretty sure that you as a parent want your kids to have as many choices at their disposal as possible so that they can find the thing in their life that's going to make them happy and have them thrive. You want them to have choices in their relationships. You want them to have choices in their career and in their school and in their future and in the things they do and the vacations they take together, the vacations you take together. You don't want to just be told you have to go to Disney World every summer. You want to go where you want to go. You want to do what you want to do. You want to eat where you want to eat. You want to wear what you want to wear. And that's what freedom affords us. And there is two choices we face. We can stay in the status quo, where we are forced to either go to the school in our zip code because this is the neighborhood we wanted to live in or could afford, or we can have our education choices look like everything else in our life that gives us meaning and purpose. We choose the church we want to attend. We choose the restaurants we want to go and celebrate our anniversary together as a couple or our company Christmas party. Those are less important choices than the choice to send our kids to school and to have peers and teachers and influencers and authorities in their lives. Most of the choices we make aren't as important as the choice of where our kids go to school. And unless we get real parental empowerment, we won't have the choice at all. Many of us don't have the choice. And I think that if you look in your heart, you know that that's obviously the right answer. And that the people trying to say otherwise, the people trying to obfuscate what's going on, to pit us against each other, to force us to be in choices we don't want so that we fight each other, that is a divide and conquer strategy. And I think you need to see that for what it is and understand that the person trying to take your choices away or keep them restricted isn't looking out for you. I'm not sure who they're looking out for, but it's not you.
John, thank you for sharing your wisdom with everyone, your experiences. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. If you haven't checked out Dad Saves America, I encourage you to do so. And now you have the power.